Warning, the following program contains content that some people may find offensive or challenging. If you are the sort of person who is easily offended, or one of those jerks who likes to, or if you're one of those jerks who likes to go laying complaints, do not watch this show. Seriously. Welcome to Stephen Inquisition. My name is Stephen Berry. Just going to start by thanking my sponsors on patreon.com/Mr. Berry, Mr. Berry, Stephen Overton, Peter Niz, Bruce Carley, Robert Tucker, Mike McCormick, Mega Mike, and Warren. If you enjoy this show, then please join those in supporting it financially at patreon.com/Mr. Berry, Mr. Berry. Or you can also contribute on PayPal, recurring or one-off payments at Mr. Berry NZ, or on crypto.com. And I mean, it costs sweet fuck all to contribute to that at the moment. Mr. Berry NZ, $paystring.crypto.com. My guest tonight, our very first guest on the Stephen Inquisition, is Andrew Bramwell. He's 54 years old, married with 3 kids. Andrew was originally born in England, but has chosen to make New Zealand his home. Andrew has a background in construction engineering and is currently studying to register as a licensed building practitioner in construction management, level 3 design and quantity surveying. Andrew has chosen to discuss housing quality in New Zealand. Andrew, your inquisition starts now. Could you please begin by outlining what is wrong with the quality of housing in New Zealand?
There's a number of factors. Initially, I thought it was the builders, and I'm wrong about that. Some of it's the builders, but really it isn't. It isn't the builders. And I thought, well, is it the materials? Well, yes, materials are a problem, and the way materials are certified and put into use, we're using a scheme that's shared with Australia for a lot of that, and a lot of that's to do with the cost and being a small country, and I can see the benefit in that. But there's a couple of tensions there. The source of finance, is that a problem? I think that probably is a problem for a lot of people, that how our houses are financed. The regulatory landscape, is that a problem? Yeah, there's problems there too. There's number of problems with where you can and can't build, and people have brought that up from time to time. People blame, a number of little bits of legislation and some bigger bits. One that's being superseded at the moment is the RMA, that people use as a political football, and they're quite rightly in doing that, because there's some serious problems with the RMA. And is it the designers and architects? Well, yeah, they will only bring in what they think the market's gonna, want to buy. So is there someone that does there need to be education of the consumers? Absolutely. So there's a whole lot of factors in play there. There's not one single thing. Have governments failed? Well, yeah, they've made mistakes. There's been some errors. The errors are right across the board, from how buildings are, how building itself is regulated, how materials are regulated, how finance is regulated, how property works, how security works for banks, the canons of lending. They're all problems. So we've got so much we can talk about. And my idea is that the way to fix this is to be a bit of a greenie, is to take away a lot of the offshore supplied materials and start to be more self-sufficient. And obviously that's going to generate jobs and innovation. And the other side of it is that MBIE and the government carries on with the replacement of the RMA, as like they're doing, and like the previous governments have been doing as well. And they work to take away any roadblocks to bring in the new legislation.
What do you think of what they're doing with local councils, specifically Auckland at the moment, where they've decided to basically take a blanket approach to knock out a lot of the restrictive district plans and intensify housing in places where perhaps the neighbours don't want that.
Yeah, and it's going to be people that are, rightly upset. They don't want to have, an 8-story building right next to their little bungalow, It's saying that the way that the council implements that does have a large degree of flexibility. It's not actually a blanket, decree from central government that thou shalt allow an 8-story building to be plonked any damn where that a developer feels is appropriate. That it's not quite as simple as that. However, local body politicians will tell you differently because they want to get elected again and they want to fight for something. So go them and go their story. I think their story is important. And, I think in another show, you should get some of those guys on and maybe ask them about that. And, how much of what you're saying,
yes.
How much of what you're saying is actually about getting re-elected and how much is actually factual. And, if someone goes and reads what has taken place in the communication, are they going to call you a liar maybe, or maybe someone that bends the truth a little bit to shape some kind of narrative so that you clip the ticket again.
When I wrote the guide to voting in 2019 for Auckland, you would be absolutely flabbergasted by the number of candidates who don't actually know what the job they're standing for does. They're promising fixed Auckland transport from a local board member's position. It's like constitutionally, there's nothing to do with you. Like, I'm going to stand up to them. Well, okay, good luck with that.
Oh, that's the reason why it was set up as a separate entity to stop political interference from local board members. My name's Roger and I've been a resident here for the last 56 years and these buses are going down the wrong road and I'm going to put a stop to it now. I
remember running as a mayoral candidate in 2013 and before my debate there was a local board debate for Iraqi local board. First guy got up, he was an independent and he said, I'm going to cut rates, which he can't do because local boards just get allocated money. And every single candidate after that just said, yeah, we can't cut rates, but we can be better about spending. And I thought I would not want to be that person just then. But in terms of quality of housing in New Zealand, are there a specific sort of building where you would start? I mean, are century-old villas where we got it right and where we should be sticking, or is it the Leaky Home saga?
The Leaky Home saga is really interesting. At one side you've got James Hardie, a massive company. At the other side of it, you've got, you had this class action, brought by homeowners, and then wedged right in the middle, you've got the building control authorities, which is the territorial authorities around New Zealand that have allowed these buildings to be constructed. And then you've got the builders themselves, the poor buggers that followed the instructions that were supplied to them by the supplier, the recommended installation instructions, and then they get in the neck for following these instructions. So the problem that's in behind all of this is that that system of building does work, but just not here. Because there's a whole lot of things in play here. It's about where the moisture is in the building, how the moisture can get in and out. The combination of using untreated timber and not having ventilation in a very damp kind of country. We get a lot of rain here. We've got a very, very fluid ground. We've got a lot of erosion. That's a natural thing that takes place here.
We didn't have these leaky building problems in the 1970s, did we? Which was really 1960s and 70s, which was our last building boom. A lot of state houses, historical state houses, are from that period, and the tenants complain about the mold. And I wonder how much of that is just lazy tenants, or how much of that is something wrong with the buildings being built.
There's a couple of social factors in there too. When those houses were built, people lived differently. So we've got to take that into consideration. And also there has been subtle climatic shifts, and also there has been a heating of, you've got your urban heating dynamics, and people go, oh, that's not much, but it's actually, fractions of degrees actually do add up to create situations of moisture retention inside building envelopes.
So is the problem that we're using heaters, or is it climate change?
It's a bit of both. And it's also the fact that we're awake longer. People back then, they didn't stay up watching TV. Their bodies were in more of a resting state. So their respiration was a lot slower, a lot less intense. They weren't expending the same kind of energy. So, people forget about those little social things. They go, oh, the building's fucked. Oops, oh, my daughter's going to come in.
You got to get your bottom smacked.
This is a 1950s state house that I'm in now. So I'm in a suburb that most of the houses are one of the 500 unique designs that were built in New Zealand in that era that Kirk government built. And it's a shame they knocked all the ones down on Bastion Point, because there was a lot of beautiful ones there. They've done really, really well. Because fixing these houses is actually relatively simple.
Is it relatively simple when you take into account the heritage controls that come from the Resource Management Act, which fuel the council's interference and everybody trying to just live their own bloody life in their private property? Does that make it more difficult? Are there more hoops?
No, because the only real barrier there would obviously be, if they want to change the cladding or the roof, or because even window, change outs can be quite sympathetic to heritage values. So, it's really only if someone wants to put a second level on, or they want to change the building substantially. Like in this city, in Hamilton, we've got a couple of heritage areas, and one of them happens to be a 1950s state house area. They call it Haynes Paddock. And before it was turned into a heritage area, there was a few people that added on to some of these houses with mixed results aesthetically.
Aesthetics aren't really anybody else's problem, though, are they?
Well, it depends on how what's the word? Laissez-faire you are. Live and let live. Where you are on that political spectrum. Some people see the value in having cohesive built environments and understand that you can actually build criminality into neighbourhoods in the way that you set them up. You can actually build an inclination for people to throw bottles at each other or have riots, or these things have been studied.
State house areas, hasn't it? And as the state house systems failed to deal with the volume of demand, and of course, because the rents are artificially low, the demand's higher than it otherwise might be, and supply doesn't meet it, and it's actually turning blocks of motel areas and tourist areas into just these crime-ridden area parts, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an unfortunate thing that successive governments allowed the slippage to take place. Really, there should have been a replacement strategy way back.
So
the family tax credits.
You've listed a lot of things that are wrong. So I'm just going to flip it on its head first and see if we maybe could take the easy, get the easy parts. What do you think we're doing right?
Well, like I said in the introduction, the phasing out of the RMA and replacing with 3 key pieces of legislation, I think that's the right thing. I think the construction
you've got the urban
contracts
planning legislation. And then there would be environmental protection legislation. And remind me what the third one is?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I have to go and look it up.
I think those are the 2 key ones, though. Do you think these reforms are actually going to do that, though? How many times have we tried this?
Well, the interesting thing about that is that people have talked about the Town and Country Planning Act being easier, right? But the trouble with the Town and Country Planning Act is it took away the right of tangata whenua to improve their land. So it actually created a lot of impoverishment of Māori in New Zealand.
Mm.
And you can actually link that to health outcomes. You can link that to crime. You can link that to prison populations. You can just keep going, of just one piece of legislation being an absolute cluster of consequences.
So we're giving
yes,
Māori the land back and not equipping them with the actual right to exercise ownership over that. And under a tribal model as well, it tends to be the elite who probably get what little they can out of it, while the average Māori see nothing of it. Would that be a fair, if somewhat casual summing up?
It's quite general, but I mean there is some evidence of that in some recent media where just out of Gisborne there, Tugamara Bay, that people were talking about wanting the government to step in and cancel the 900-year leases and saying that was a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Because the leaseholders, they got $14,000 or something, and then all this money's eaten up in fees, and so the cynical person would go, well, who's getting those fees? There's 350 landowners, and they get like a pittance each from the leases. So leasehold land, that's another whole kettle of fish. There's a lot of people farming on leasehold land, and they've got improvements that they've put into it, and that's worth money. So for the government to come and step in and go, look, we're going to end your lease, which they're not going to do. You and I both know that's not going to happen. No government is going to do that. Whatever happens, it'll be some sort of easing sort of process. And in the legislation already, leaseholders can be compensated for their improvements. It's already written down. And that's also common law as well. So, I know there's some people that are going around saying that, and they even go, the Māoris are going to take back the land and we're going to lose all our improvements. Well, they're just really quite naive, and they're just rattling cages, really, aren't they?
And where there's been genuine cases of historical wrongs, they absolutely should be corrected. So what a lot of people say in Greyland is riddled with these horrific, bloody old, more than a century old villas all around the place. They're cramped in together. The streets are tiny, and you can't do a bloody thing with them, and which puts up the value as well. I don't know how the hell these things are $1 million plus. Are these old villas actually of any value at all, or is it time to just knock the bastards down? And what would you replace it with?
Well, 8-story high apartment buildings, of course. Greyland's very central. You got to keep a few, just as examples. Yep. Keep a few notable examples, but get rid of the rest. I mean, the thing is, the real heritage value is actually in places like Russell, where, there's real heritage value there, or Akaroa, right? Greyland, it's a matter of opinion. It's my opinion that Greyland's heritage value is dubious. And the whole idea of a very young bicultural country holding on to something that's only 100 years old, and a lot of things that are only 100 years old or 150 years old, just seems a little bit absurd, really. They weren't... we inherited a lot of designs from New South Wales. Houses came over in kit sets from there. And then in the Waikato, Ellis Brothers, they started a factory up, and then the government had a factory here as well. So it was a good place to manufacture houses and housing parts. In fact, if you're a heritage homeowner and you're listening to this right now, you can actually still go to Ellis and Benand, who own a Mitre 10, is it Mitre 10? Placemakers thing. You can go find out who's got the dies to make all of the, the fittings and stuff.
Yeah, well, I
I'm not
guess
sure
in
if that's
terms
still
of
quite correct.
valuing heritage, I think that if you're willing to spend $1 million on having a shitty old cold house, that's really the measure of valuing heritage, not telling other people what to do with their heritage house. I personally don't value it, and if I could bloody afford a house, I would knock one down as soon as possible. But yeah, dreams are free.
There is benefit, however, in terms of energy consumption and efficiencies to actually fix things. And
Yeah, I
one
was
of the
going to
things that
ask
I've
you
noticed
about that
about
because
Kiwis,
we've got all these new regulations coming. I write articles weekly for the bfd.co.nz, which are behind a paywall, so very few people see them. But before I got kicked out of my last place, left my last place in Auckland, I actually went through all the new healthy home regulations. It took me a couple of hours to work this out, measuring it all up and everything. And it was going to cost it would cost an extra $200 a week for that landlord to comply with that by the 2024 deadline. I was paying $500 a week for a 2-bedroom apartment, so $700 a week for a 2-bedroom apartment. Do we need some minimum guidelines to keep homes healthy, or is this just going to drive poverty?
It's a case of playing catch up, and it's an unfortunate thing about playing catch up is that you're always going to get people that are going to have pain, and what governments have to manage is where that pain occurs and try to ease it as much as possible. And they did the healthy homes thing is not new. Like, it's not just this government or the previous coalition or the one before it. It's not a new thing. But what is new is actually having deadlines and having consequences. And so when you look at it from that point of view, have a lot of people not done the right thing for quite a long time? And have they not done the right thing because there's really been no imperative to do so? And if you look at behaviour of Kiwis, and I love New Zealand and I love being in New Zealand, and I consider myself a New Zealander. And, driving on the road, you see the behaviour of Kiwis driving on the road is a classic example of, the speed limit's really just a guide, It's just, who cares if, 400 or 500 people a year die? It's just, I'm not going to die. I'm just going a couple of Ks over the speed limit. It's going to be fine, And so there's kind of like pushing the edge of the consequences. But if we stick to building and look at what Kiwis do with their buildings, they'll go down to one of those, big sheds in the weekend and, spend $200 or $300 on a whole bunch of crap they don't really need to put on their house, but they don't clean the gutters.
Yeah, and they don't weed their tiles, etc.
No,
I'm a bit guilty of that, but I'm always a tenant. So, I mean, in terms of, there's kind of a two-part question here. So we know that New Zealand is drastically short on many materials. I understand that pre-nailed building frames are extremely hard to come by. Jib and these may be the same things, but jib and plaster wall, same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, huge waiting list for that. These are pushing projects back about 6 months. Is it COVID? COVID will have an impact. But are the minimum guidelines too prescriptive? And is that killing the ability of people to innovate and therefore just join the queue for these mandatory products?
Well, the thing is that the guidelines aren't too prescriptive. They're not actually prescriptive at all. It's all performance based. And this is where the public, and to some degree, builders have got some contempt of products that they don't like to use. And so they'll always recommend certain products. It's a bit like that whole thing where people go, oh, doctors they only recommend medicines that the pharmaceutical companies, that they push on them, which, you and I both know is not true at all, because we've got Pharmac and all of that. So that actually stops that from happening in New Zealand. Might be true in other countries. But anyway, so people think it's prescriptive, but it's not. It's performance-based.
Okay,
and this is what makes the whole thing about the leaky buildings thing. That makes it super interesting, because at some point, James Hardy, and at some point the retailers, and at some point the builders themselves, have all completed documentation to verify that the product's actually good.
Okay, but there's been no prescription of what products they must use.
No. So one of the accusations that the class action lawyer made in public, but has not backed up in court, is kind of a risky thing to say, but because she didn't name anybody, I guess she gets away with it. She said that building companies around the world just dump their crap on the New Zealand market. And yeah, that might be true, but we choose to use them. So it's like we choose to be a neoliberal economy with open borders, and to have all of the benefits of it, getting cheap stuff and all of that kind of thing, and yet we don't want to have the consequences of that.
I've heard it say that in capitalist countries, because Australia's wasted like thousands of tons of avocados recently because all the cafe closures dropped the demand for it, but they didn't want to drop their prices because it just wasn't economical to sell. So they dumped it all, and people went, oh, capitalism, things get wasted. But I contrast living in a socialist country where you eat rubbish and nothing's wasted. So is it necessarily a terrible thing that we're getting these cheap materials here? And what can we do better?
Well, procedurally, so as far as the improvements with the Building Act 2004 and the subsequent movement in the building code, we have seen improvements in how materials are used. We're starting to see a lot more innovation. New Zealand panel products, natural timber-based panel products are amazing. We've got panelized building systems that you can erect a house in a day and have it weatherproof in 2 or 3.
Now we've still got these shortages of building supplies, though. That's largely due to COVID, isn't it? Due to the inability to import them.
You've also got other pressures too. You've got all of these people that have got a couple of zeros added onto their house property value, and so they're spending this newfound equity on improvements. And so, you've got a lot of materials going into piecemeal, improvements that you can argue that have an impact on new builds. And then you've got some quite large infrastructure projects, public projects and commercial projects taking place. You've also still got Christchurch rebuild happening. And so the Canterbury rebuild. So you've got a lot of building activity going on. You've got cash coming into the economy because of the COVID bailout steps, the loans and stuff. And that money's being spent. And that's also not really helping consumer pricing, because it's boiling hot at the moment. My avocado's gone up.
There's too much money.
I can't afford a avocado for breakfast anymore.
I'm glad I hate avocado.
I like it. Because I'm controversially I'm vegan, so I eat that stuff a lot. So
yeah,
I eat a lot of carrots, as you can tell.
I've got medication for that. I hope it's working.
Actually, your hair looks really good at the moment.
Oh, thank you so much. That's made my day. So with the materials that we're short on, is New Zealand going to be in a position to meet this demand in the near future? I know Windstone's building new plants.
Yeah.
That's about a year away. Is relying on New Zealand something that we have to grit our teeth and bear?
I think we're going to see a movement in localism, and that's why I'm kind of flying that flag now, because I want to be an early adopter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You
So
want to start a growth market.
I want the kudos of people going, oh, see, he said that first. So no, yeah. People have been saying it for a long time. I'm just another bandwagoneer, really. A bit of a greenie and a bandwagoneer. So, but yeah, Winstone's plant's coming on, and some of the bright future stuff that I think it was the Bolger government brought in to try and keep local innovation going, and which actually ended up in a lot of New Zealand companies growing and then being sold to offshore interests, and then all of the labour being offshored. It was an unintended consequence of success, really, and one of the things about being an open market. So part of that is we saw a lot of sawmill closures. So we started shipping a lot of logs overseas, and you go to Tauranga, to go to Mount Maunganui and the port there, you just look at those logs lined up and you go, well, I can't build my house, and yet there's tons and tons and tons and tons of logs there going on a ship every hour.
That's being imported back once it's improved into something we can use for housing? Is that correct? Yeah.
Tiny wee amount. Tiny wee amount.
You told me you're a greenie, and you told me you like localism, so I think I've got somewhere to grill you here.
Here we go.
I mean, New Zealanders, aren't they just fucking lazy?
Well, let's go back to that gutter comment I made. Look at media advertising. How much media advertising goes on gutters and roofing in this country? Surely we'd put a roof on it should last a long time. Really, shouldn't it?
Yep.
Why are we replacing our roof all the time? Why are we wasting money on that crap? What's really made our housing market overcooked? Is it the fact we don't maintain our houses? Is that a factor? Is that a factor that no one's really considered? So is it laziness?
I think that would be fair.
People move every 7 years, so that's still a thing. I didn't realize. I thought that was a thing in the 80s and 90s. People move every 7 years, but it's still actually a thing here. The real estate agents quote it. They go, they're still pulling it out and going, people are going to move. I'm going to still make money. I don't care. I'm a real estate agent. I make money I'm not personally a real estate agent. For people who are watching them.
There's nothing you can really do about the homeowners being lazy, I think. No. But what about the labour force? I mean, we're crying out for skilled migrants for the building industry, and yet the government would have me believe that it's just a matter of putting up wages and creating apprentices. But isn't that in itself a double-edged sword? Because then we still don't have probably the quality of skill that we could be importing, and then we're paying it more than we would if we were importing the skills, and the people that we're paying more are less reliant, and then that's just adding to the delays in house building and the poor quality.
Yeah, and once again, you've got to go back and also consider that our workers have been put into work doing things that they wouldn't ordinarily be doing with Christchurch and so on, and big casinos being built in Auckland. Well, sorry, it's an event centre, isn't it? I think it's nearly finished. But anyway, and railway stations in Auckland, and lots of government stuff being built. You got hospitals being built, rebuilt.
So therefore, we should have plenty of homegrown labour, shouldn't we?
We should, and we actually do. And our labour force in New Zealand is actually really good for building. We've got great people. We've got good wages and conditions. Our health and safety was really crap. It's not so crap now.
I can tell you, being in Australia, the difference in health and safety is black and white. I mean, my background's supermarkets. Health and safety was absolutely madly over the top there, but I got used to it. Come to Australia, it's much more relaxed. You try driving a forklift around outside the back of a store, and people are just walking through and go, "What the fuck?"
I'm glad I brought up health and safety. I'm
Yeah,
really
yeah,
thinking about it now.
yeah. But I mean, it just seems to me that you're telling me the wages are good. The people sitting on the unemployment benefits or the people who won't pick fruit are telling me it's crap and that the market needs to put the wages up. But then that's just going to further fuel inflation and make those goods and services unaffordable anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, the fruit picking thing is one of those things where there used to be these gangs of workers, and they would migrate. And I when I was a young fella, I actually joined one of those gangs for half a season, and I was did some picking around the place, and I really enjoyed it. It was fantastic. And where you went, they would put on, they'd put on some beers at the end of the week. You'd have a campfire, and you had this real sense of community, and it was fantastic. But the industry, they broke all that up. They actually shot themselves in the foot. And conditions, as far as work conditions went, it was a race to zero. And so the migrant
I wouldn't
workers,
deny that.
the migrant workers are, they were a sticking plaster on a much, much bigger issue. So where's the money going? So Consumer brought this up actually. Where was the money going? I know this has got nothing to do with building, but it's got everything to do with the quality of life. And so where we live. So, where did the money go? So there's been a shift in the value chain. So if the grower's not getting it to pay the workers, where is it? Where is that money? Go looking for it. Where is it in the chain? You got the retail, the two big, the duopoly that we've got saying, we're only make, out of every grocery spend of $100, we're lucky if we make, $1.20 or something or whatever. I can't even remember what it was. It just went over my head. I'm like, okay, so you've got a really good business. That's awesome. Thank you for telling us that, that you got this great business. But where's the money gone? It's like I play music as my other life, and we play in bands and stuff. And it's only really been due to COVID that band prices are going up.
All right.
$100 for a band member to play has been the thing for 40 years. Now, where's the inflation there? So you go, well, where's the value gone? So people are paying $20 for a drink in a bar, and that band member on stage, he's not getting that money. People paying, $5 for a nice plump avocado and on their toast and some, Greyland Cafe or something. And, the picker's not getting any of that. The picker's, getting a tiny wee fraction of a fraction of a fraction. So, that's one of the things about, not having the right kind of moderation in the market. So there's no correction for that. We have COVID come along and the supply of migrant workers disappears. And the growers are like, the thing that...
And it's positive to see that the COVID restrictions were the most totalitarian thing we've ever seen since 1984, ironically, when we got rid of Muldoon. So it just infuriates me to hear people say, the market's not surviving, your business should fall over. Markets aren't designed for those sorts of restrictions. Is New Zealand's market responding to the shortage in supplies and products, given that big hit it's taken over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think so. I just briefly talked about panel products before. And there's this thing called SIPs, which is structural insulated panels. They've been huge in North America and in some ways Europe as well, because they just go up so quickly, and they use magnesium oxide with polystyrene or polyurethane foam in the middle, just like a freezer thing, except without the combustible aluminium that freezers have. They make great fires, those freezers. Anyway, especially if the coolant's LPG, it's like woohoo, illegal in New Zealand now. Luckily, after our Tamahiri fire that we lost firefighter, which is really sad. Anyway, SIPS panels, they're great, and there's like these fire retardants that basically make the fire go out if the polystyrene catches. If it manages to penetrate the magnesium oxide board, which is very unlikely, but if it does, the polystyrene doesn't go. It just kind of like smolders and puts itself out. But those are two products, right? And then you've got cross-lam timber is starting to grow in New Zealand. There's a lot of commercial products using cross-laminated timber, which is the boards laminated one across the other. There's a couple of big factories making that stuff and using.
That's the pre-nailed stuff?
No, this is actually a panelized product.
Oh, right. Okay.
And these panels can be as big as a truck can carry, which is quite big because they put them on an angle, So they've got that height, and then they've got that, that in that diagonal they've got, and then they've got the length, so they can make quite big panels. And that's, that's all just one big, very, very strong panel. So, those laminated beams, it's that same kind of thing where the thing's glued. The other thing you've got timber that's laminated like a veneer thin timber. They call it LVL. And that's used in framing, and it's very, very precise. Because one of the things about building with timber is just goes, and so you've got to have this tolerance, when you're building using timber, because it moves. It's an organic thing. It just it wants to move. It wants to have a bit of a dance. And so you spend all this time designing your buildings to constrain it to dance in just ways that you think are acceptable and you can get away with. And hopefully it won't crack your monolithic cladding that you got from James Hardie.
In terms of, you told me that you want to minimise offshore supply and develop as much as possible in New Zealand. That's clearly going to be a long-term project, and it's probably not going to deal with the supplies of products that we've got now, and it's really just a case of waiting until the New Zealand market catches up in that sense.
People have got a choice, though, Stephen, in the sense that when they're doing an alteration, they can actually use alternative products. They don't have to use sticks and jib. They can actually use products that way outperform the stick, the space frame mechanism of building.
Are these the greeny products?
Not necessarily.
Traditionally, greeny products like solar power and that sort of and wind power are heavily subsidised and not economic. Is that going to be different for these building materials?
Yeah, they stand on their own 2 feet. They definitely stand on their own 2 feet. They're in terms of the mineral-based products, like the SIPS panels I was talking about, everything that's in that product can be sourced locally in New Zealand. Any of the red earth,
some of these government buildings, which are like 5-star ratings, and Julianne Genter wetting herself over hitting the 5 stars and trying to make hospitals more green, etc. These must be much more expensive than the alternative.
No, because they are, from the outset, they're implementing a regime of building management that's a total life cycle. What we've done in the past is we've put buildings up and we've said, look, we're consenting this to last a certain amount of time, and no one gets on the roof and cleans the gutters, and the whole thing fails, and they blame the builder, and anyway, and they blame the government, and they blame someone else, and and anyway, so here we are now. We've got a thing called Building Information Management, or BIM for short. Oh, you got a nice BIM.
And is this trying to educate the public? Because Jesus Christ, you've been knocking your head against the table.
No, it's not. It's actually something that benefits everybody that works in the tool chain, the suppliers, and it benefits the consenting authorities. It benefits the government. It benefits the person who's borrowing the money. It benefits the entity that's lending the money. Everybody wins out of this. It even creates jobs, because previously unseen mechanical maintenance becomes seen. It's like, actually, you need someone to go clean those gutters, because part of the performance of this building envelope, those gutters have got to be clear of debris. They've got a self-cleaning aspect, but you've got to go and check them, you know. And so, yeah, it's a really good thing. And it's not new. It's been evolving. And it's an international thing. There's an open BIM standard. It has been driven a lot by the 3D CAD type, the drawing companies. You know, Autodesk is a big company. There's Rhino and so on, and you know, all the big companies that do the architectural design and that and engineering. But really, it's just a life cycle quality mechanism, and it's a way of documenting it. And far from being, you know, bureaucracy, people will go, oh, it's just more red tape and da-da-da. Well, actually, no, it's just collecting data. It's just basically the data that you would normally have, you're actually just putting it all in one place rather than people carrying it around their heads and that person leaves and whatever, or gets sick or forgets or whatever, and the gutters don't get cleaned 3 years in a row. And then you see the Marley ad on TV and go, oh, yeah, we need to replace our gutters. And you go look at them and go, actually, yeah, we did because we keep forgetting to clean them. I know that's a bugbear of mine, but it's a classic Kiwi thing, is don't clean the gutters.
One of my concerns is that if we do have more of a movement that's pushing for very precise quality requirements, it's going to really stultify the entire industry, as when you come up with improvements, you need to go to a bloody bureaucrat and get their permission, which just delays more things when we're already so far behind. Council inspectors, I think quite rightly, attracted a lot of criticism during the Leaky Homes saga, because ultimately the legislation required that they sign it off. What would you say if we did away with council inspectors altogether, but required that new builds had building insurance, and that insurance companies actually took responsibility for making sure those buildings were fit for purpose and paid out in the case where they wrote up something which actually proved to be not what it should have been?
I love that. Your whole proposition is really good. And the reason why I love that is because it puts the compliance costs back into the hands of the people that actually create the compliance problems. And so, and I just wanted to answer something you said before. Yeah, I know that building inspectors took a lot of heat, but the thing is that the problem that they were facing is they were following a verification path, and they were right in the way they followed that. They were procedurally correct, and so this is why the class action court case that was taken by the homeowners was targeted at the supplier and not at the consenting authorities. It's because they found that the consenting authorities were actually following the prescribed or the methods of ensuring that what was claimed to perform in a certain way was installed in the correct way. But the claim of its performance was flawed. Or I can't really say that because I'm not a lawyer, but what I can say is that the environmental situation of the installation meant that the installation method was perhaps not well considered. So privatizing the whole consenting process has a lot of benefits, and in some ways it can make it a lot more affordable. Because I
also think about the companies that actually went bankrupt as a result of being sued. Which, I mean, builders, subcontractors, etc., which would have participated in that, they wouldn't have the resources to compensate that. Even
the problem you've got there is that those contractors did not verify that product, and nor should they have to. This is the issue.
An insurance company, on the other hand, has the deep pockets to. First of all, they're greedy, so they want to make sure that they're not going to be paying out claims later on, but they've probably got the pockets to do it should it be necessary.
Well, I mean, they're making 80 cents in the dollar, so they can afford it, eh? The poor supermarket making, 2 cents in the dollar. Oh,
Yeah. Oh, don't get me started on the attacks on supermarkets.
and the councils who are making negative $20 in the dollar.
Yeah, well, I mean, ACT's got a great policy about splitting the GST on new builds with councils as well to incentivise them to facilitate the creation of infrastructure and new builds as well.
Right.
I'm not their mouthpiece anymore, but I'm certainly still sympathetic. What would you think of that?
I mean, there's definitely some benefits in that, but you've got to remember that although councils are fiscally driven, but they're also community driven, and so under the Local Government Act, their mandate is primarily community driven. And so if they're taking money instead of doing what's right for the community, then they're not a very good council. So there is a balance there, and so it's about them being able to balance their responsibility with the incentive to. You got the situation now where you've got a company that's announced in jury that they're going to do a 10-year build. It's a consortium of companies, sorry. Some quite big interests involved in that. They're going to do a whole satellite there, I think 40,000 population target at the end of the process. And of course, the Auckland councillors are saying, oh, well, we haven't budgeted for that. Well, they're telling you that they're doing it. You have been involved in them talking about doing it, and now you want to complain about it. It's like, well, hold on a second. Along comes ABC Developer. They don't just announce these things out of thin air. They've actually got to make sure it's viable. So they've already spoken to the council. And if you go, look, it's probably a couple of years ago, probably 5 years ago, probably 6 years ago even. These things don't come out of thin air. And the council
should
goes,
the developers be paying for that infrastructure and hooking it up to the main, I don't know, sewage and power and stuff? Should the developers be paying for that, really?
Well, the developer largely is. But what they aren't paying for is they're not paying for the infrastructure connections, and that's where the council's got their problem.
All right,
but there is actually schemes in place for local government to be able to ask central government for money for these things, so that they don't have to go cap in hand to borrow the money elsewhere. And
oh God, I don't think we need any more bloody money coming from the government to the council. Look, we've got 8 minutes left in the Inquisition.
Okay, all right.
First of all, where are you at in terms of your construction career? I know that you're upskilling at the moment.
I'm upskilling and I'm looking for professional supervision. So I want to find some quality people to be my guide in the next phase. I really want to build community housing and whānau housing. What I mean by whānau housing is, if you think about a lot of the equatorial countries, families live together for multi-generations. And they used to, like Maori people used to here, and the Polynesian people still do in some of the places in the Pacific where they haven't really been overly pushed into other ways.
No, my husband's Filipino, and even in New Zealand it's the same. So yeah,
I think we should bring that back. But
that should be something that is justifiable by market demand and something you can profit from.
Yep. I'm not going to put my hand out. I don't think that needs that. In fact, I think you're going to see finance companies going, oh, actually, we can see some huge potential in this. Kiwi Bank is already saying that they're helping, collaborative. They've got a collaborative lending product where people they're not actually in a relationship or a legal relationship. They're actually just friends, and they've got means of securing that. So Kiwi Bank have gone ahead with that product for people that have chosen to buy a house together. Actually, New Zealand law does protect them, because if you live with another person for a certain amount of time, there is actually a protection there that you're considered to be in a cooperative financial. I can't remember what the term is. I'm not an expert.
I remember having that discussion when my partner and I were together for 3 years. We didn't get married too much later, but eventually it just became, well, what's the point of not being?
Congratulations on pushing the button. I've got one of those.
Yep.
It's 10 years.
Now, you're currently located in Hamilton. Would that be right?
Yeah.
What what would be, without compromising any commercial advantages you maybe have up your sleeve, what would be your easy wins for Hamilton?
A number of things. That the brownfield or the infill developments leave a lot to be desired. In saying that, there's a lot of really good quality stuff going up, but there's also been quite a bit of crap. And so there's definitely an opportunity for differentiation there. And
a lot of the aesthetics look really similar and drab, but that's not necessarily crap, is it?
No, that's not really the problem. The problem is that people are not building communities. So they're actually providing housing, which is essential, and I commend them for that. But they're not building communities, and that's where the gap is that you've actually got to take that next step and actually think about the social aspects of what you're doing and apply.
I hate my neighbours. So are you talking about places where I have to talk to my neighbours?
I'm talking about places where you choose to live because you like the neighbours. Yep. So making those kind of decisions and making that more accessible for people to do that. So if you could find 7 friends and say, look, I've been talking to this guy. He does whānau or community housing developments. We want to relocate to Hamilton because it's got great, the gardens, everything's fantastic here. The people are amazing. I mean, look at me for a start. And we want to relocate. Well, talk to me. I'm not qualified yet. Everything's under supervision. So any building work that I do, someone else is basically signing it off until I've got my qualifications. And I'm fine with that. I think that's great. I want to keep that as long as possible because I benefit from that person's experience. And I get guidance. Of course, I don't make profit, but I get, you can't really buy experience, can you? Unless you do that. Unless you got a mentor.
Yeah. And I imagine it's maybe a bit humbling and a bit of a challenge to have to go back to school after a few decades.
Yeah, it is. And I'm in classes I'm in classes with 18-year-olds, 17 and 18-year-olds, virtual classes because I'm doing extramural. And I mean, they're great. Their view of the world is quite different, and I get that. And I try not to interact with them too much because I find the cultural difference a little bit frustrating. But they're really good when it comes to talking about the actual pure study stuff because they're applying themselves. They want to be there. Some of them are on the government apprentice scheme, which has just been extended. I see they announced that. Next year they're extending it some more to get more people into the industry. So if you think about a career change,
the apprenticeship, surely it's in the interest of the development companies to develop some people who may spend several years with them.
Yeah. We don't have a bonding scheme here that they do overseas, and that's part of our free market culture.
I don't know. We're paying for the apprenticeships.
We're paying for the privilege of having an educated workforce, and those workers pay back their student loans. And as far as the subsidy goes for the F aspect of our education. There's been a lot of studies on how that benefits an economy of having an educated workforce, and so we get that back in tax, 1,000-fold easy from basically every dollar we spend on someone's education, tertiary education, we get $1,000 back. So
I would love to run the numbers on that, but I'm not going to be able to do that right now.
It's not my maths. It's not my maths.
No,
I'm just yeah.
No. All right. Well, we've come to 8 o'clock. That's all the time we've got for. Andy, thank you very much for joining us. That's been very informative. And you have survived the Inquisition. Thanks very much. If you'd like to take part in the Stephen Inquisition, email mrberrynz@gmail.com. There's 3 simple rules. 1, I will interview anybody about anything they want to talk about, even if it's something that I have no idea about, and there's probably a lot of those things. Number 2, if you don't want to discuss a certain thing, if you don't want me to talk about the horrible things you did in high school and destroy your life, I won't. And number 3, you can expect an assertive and inquisitive style of interviewing. Until soon, I will leave it there. Mr. Berry show will be on again later this week, and another edition of the Stephen Inquisition is coming soon. Thank you very much.